Story 1.
It was a rainy Thanksgiving. We have a small family, so our family gatherings are tiny. It was my mom, my two sisters, our grandparents, and I for dinner at my mom's house. My older sister Nancy has been moved out for years. My younger sister Jamie and I still live at home with our mom. Our grandparents live 20 minutes away. Our dad's side of the family all live in a different town. We were all helping out with cooking and such, and our grandma was bringing over some food as well. We always do Thanksgiving dinner at 6 sharp. Our grandparents arrived at like 5. We had to go out and help them walk through the rain up the front stoop to make sure they didn't slip. It was really bad out. Once they were here, we put the football game on in the living room, and I sat with my grandparents and watched football with my grandpa, who was a big Cowboys fan. My sisters were in the kitchen helping my mom with the food. The rainstorm created a more comfortable and relaxing Thanksgiving evening. That is, at first. When it was time to set the table, I went to help. We were all at the table by 6 as per the usual. We had a giant selection of food for the small number of people we were: turkey, leg of lamb, potatoes, stuffing, corn, cranberry sauce, cornbread, and more food I'm probably forgetting. We were all at the table eating, drinking wine, and talking before we migrated to the living room where we all watched the football game. Then, sometime before the game ended, the doorbell rang. It was still pouring outside and we weren't expecting anyone else. Our mom said, "Oh no, what if that's your father?" Long story short, our parents don't speak, but the idea of our father coming to surprise us wasn't impossible. My mom told me to go check who it was, so I went to the door and yelled through it. Who is it but the sound of the pouring rain on the front awning drowned out the sound of a male's voice on the other side. So, I opened the door with the storm door still closed and locked. There was a black man on the other side of the door. He was in a really big rain jacket with the hood up. When I opened the door, he walked closer and yelled something through the door. I had to ask him to repeat it twice before I understood him to be asking for food, saying he's hungry. Then he said something along the lines of, "The Lord will give you good karma if you spare some food," I said. 1 second I went to the living room and told my mom there's a possible homeless or just very hungry man asking for food at the front door. My mom said, "Close the door," while my grandma said, "Give him some food." I said, "I'll make a little paper plate of food for him from the leftovers." I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bunch of paper plates to account for the rain outside ruining them, and then sandwiched some of the leftovers together with them. Then I went to the front door where the guy was still standing. I held up the plate to show him, and he tried opening the door. I yelled, "Wait, it's locked," but I already was wary now after he tried opening the door. Regrettably, I still unlocked the door, and the second I started to push it open, he pulled it open with force and tried pushing his way through me. I instantly threw the food and held him back, yelling for my sisters to come help me. As Nancy came to help shut the door, I saw 2 more guys rushing up the front walkway to the door. I managed to push the man out enough to clear the door, and I helped my sister slam it shut. The second it was locked, I ran to the backyard door to make sure it was locked. I was the only able-bodied man in the house, and I felt like it was on me to protect the house. My family was in hysterics as we were brainstorming what to do. Not so shockingly, we settled for calling the police. My mom called while I kept going from window to looking outside. It was hard to see out through the pouring rain, but through the backyard window, I saw a couple of men running through the grass to the back door. I'd imagine they tried opening the back door and failed, and then I saw them running through the grass again back to the gate. Then they were gone. When the police got here, the food that I dropped onto the front stoop was still just sitting there all scattered on the porch. Not that it wasn't obvious that those guys didn't come for the food, but it's something worth mentioning. Our Thanksgiving was almost turned into a complete nightmare if it weren't for my and my sister's quick reactions. I know my grandma had her heart in the right place, wanting to help the seemingly needy, and I was influenced by her, but unfortunately, we live in a world where sometimes trying to do the right thing could bite you in the ass. We installed a doorbell camera soon after. Story 2. It was Thanksgiving night. I was over at my parents' house for dinner since they were hosting this year. I got to see some cousins and uncles I hadn't seen in almost a year. We had a typical Thanksgiving gathering for our family. My parents cooked a big meal as usual. Before dinner, though, I got a long essay of a text from some unknown number. I won't share it because it contains a lot of personal revealing details, but it started with, "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well." Then I quickly came to realize who it was that sent this text. It was this crazy stalker guy named Kevin, who I'd never even met before. We matched on a dating app and texted and snapped for a while, but we never met. He gave me obsessive vibes, and when I politely rejected going on a date with him, saying I don't think we have much in common, he got even more obsessive and aggressive. He even threatened me one time when I posted a snap story of my friend and I getting drinks because he thought I was on a date with a guy. That was when I blocked him on everything Snapchat, Instagram, and his number. But the contact didn't stop there. I get random Instagram accounts with 0 followers attempting to follow me, and I block them each time. Same thing on Snapchat. I'd get random accounts adding me with different guys' names every time. Whenever I'd add them back out of curiosity, their snap scores were always 0. After reading the entire message, I was disgusted. He was gaslighting me and borderline threatening me. I replied, "If you keep contacting me, I will go to the police. I took so long to form a reply. My grandma got annoyed and asked me to put my phone away." It was only out of sight and out of mind for me for half an hour before I got another text from another random number. It was another essay. I didn't want to completely ruin my mood and be on my phone dealing with this when I was with family. I put my phone away and just tried to focus on being a part of the conversation. When family started to leave and things started to slow down, I checked the text, and it was disturbing. It was longer than the first one, and it was him berating me and insulting me the entire time, acting like the entitled narcissistic sociopath that he clearly is. When there was just a small amount of my family left, I showed them the texts, and they were appalled. My mom wanted me to go to the police the next day to report him for harassment, which I planned on doing. I soon left my parents' house to go home to my apartment. My apartment is the lower floor of a 2-family house. My friend Chelsea is my roommate in the apartment. I got home before her and went straight to my room to look for Christmas movies to watch. My phone started ringing, and it said unknown caller. I knew it was him. I denied it and silenced my phone. I put on some silly rom-com Christmas movie to fall asleep to. It was called Surviving Christmas. All I remember about it is that it had James Gandolfini in it. It was late at night, so I didn't plan on making it through the movie. I was getting sleepy halfway through the movie when I heard walking from outside my room in the house. It was in the apartment, not from upstairs, so I assumed it was Chelsea getting home from her night with her family. The footsteps came straight to my door, then someone attempted to open my door. I always lock my bedroom door at night, even though I trust Chelsea. It's just a natural habit I have. I paused the movie and listened as the doorknob turned a few more times before I yelled, "Chelsea," then it stopped. I heard quiet footsteps walking away from the door. I grabbed my phone, about to call Chelsea, and I saw a bunch of texts on my screen from a third random number. The most alarming one was a threat saying, "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." I tried calling Chelsea like 5 times, but she never picked up. I called my parents a bunch of times until my dad picked up, and I whispered into the phone that I think that crazy stalker was in the house. My dad said to stay put, he was coming over right away. We lived 10 minutes away from each other, but he made it to me in 5. That's how fast he drove here. During that time, I stayed on the phone with my dad the whole time until Chelsea called me back. And she was crying into the phone saying she was on her way home now because she was out with a guy she met on Tinder. Apparently, this crazy guy showed up to the bar they were at and saw them together. When she told me he got aggressive, I realized my dad was still on the line and that I needed to keep him updated. As I told him everything Chelsea told me, my dad and the police arrived at the same time. He stayed on the phone with me, asking if I could hear footsteps inside the house. I told him no, but then the sound of the police sirens turned off, and I couldn't hear him anymore. That meant they were here. I hung up and called Chelsea. I ran out of my room to go to the front door to greet my dad and the police officers. My dad pulled me into a hug, then let me go as the police officers asked where the last place I saw the guy was. I told them he was trying to open my door, then left my room after I yelled Chelsea's name. I showed them all the threatening texts as well. After showing them all the doors and windows, they left for their search, and my dad stayed with me the entire night. Chelsea came home too after the police had already left. She had a black eye, and the guy she was with dropped her off and was going to come back to pick her up in the morning. My dad hugged Chelsea as well, and we all watched TV together until we fell asleep. We had the police come back in the morning to report everything and have them take pictures of Chelsea's black eye. The investigation is still ongoing, but I'll keep you updated if you want. Story 3. Thanksgiving dinner at our house is usually a whole ordeal. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family, friends, everyone comes over. We have to split the seating into the dining room table and the living room with extra fold-up tables and chairs. This year was different because we didn't invite the usual extended family due to my mom being ill. It was just me, my dad, and my sister Caitlin. After we ate, Caitlin and I cleared the table while my dad started the fire. We brought everything to the kitchen, and our dog followed. My sister got really into the dog while I started the dishes. Then, the doorbell rang. My dad and I looked at each other confused because no one should have been coming over unannounced. My dad asked me to check who it was, so I did. I went over to the front door, called out who is it, and got no answer. I opened the door with the storm door still closed, and there was a young woman standing there with no coat, looking like she just went for a run. It was freezing out there. I asked her what she wanted. She asked if she could come in and use the phone. She was acting very nervous, looking behind her constantly. I told her to hold on as I went to ask my dad. When I told him, he was hesitant, but eventually said okay. I opened the door and told her she could use our phone, but she refused to come inside. She asked if I could just bring it to her. We didn't have a cordless phone, though. I told her I could call someone for her. She then asked if I could just walk with her to the end of the street and let her use my cell phone. I didn't want to say no because I felt bad, but my dad wasn't going to let me go out there alone. My dad eventually walked over and asked her what exactly was wrong. She said she was being followed. My dad looked down the street and saw someone standing under the streetlight. He told her to come inside, but she refused again. My dad said we would call the police if she didn't want to come in. She started crying and said not to call the police. We didn't know what to do. My dad was getting frustrated and said either come in and let us help or leave. I felt bad for her, but I didn't know if we could trust her. She eventually ran off into the darkness, and the guy under the streetlight followed. We didn't call the police because we didn't know what we would even report. It was a strange encounter that left us all feeling uneasy. Later we found out from the news that a woman had been abducted from our neighborhood that night. It made us all feel guilty, like we could have done something more to help her. We just didn't know what was really happening. Story 4. When things hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. Down on my luck with my living situation, I could only crash on friends' couches for so long. Searching through roommate and apartment apps and websites, I found a listing that caught my eye. A man named Luke had a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house for $1,200 a month. He'd be my landlord and roommate since he also lived in the house. Luke noted he'd be out of the house most of the time, so the renter would often have the place to themselves. He emphasized a few ground rules in all capital letters: no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. These seemed like standard rules. When I went to view the house and meet Luke, I got a read on him as a little reclusive, with a quiet and awkward demeanor. He showed me the house, and though he was nervous, the layout was appealing. For $1,000 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out more ground rules in person, emphasizing again not to use the attic or basement. On the spot, I told him I was interested, and 2 days later I moved in. We didn't draft any lease or contract, I was just paying him off the books month to month. Settling in quickly, I noticed Luke was always home despite his claim of usually being out. Soon I started hearing loud sounds at night: footsteps, doors opening and closing. One night, around 2 a.m., I noticed the basement door was open. Looking down the stairs, I saw a dim light and heard banging sounds. Suddenly, Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking visibly annoyed. I apologized, said I was just going to the bathroom, and he angrily told me to shut the basement door. Weirded out, I went back to bed, but my mind raced with what he could be doing down there. A week later, I came home to find my bedroom door unlocked. Though nothing seemed missing, things had been moved. It dawned on me that Luke likely had a key and went through my stuff. When I confronted him, he denied everything and claimed I had the only key to my bedroom. Flabbergasted, I started looking for other places to stay. One night, when Luke wasn't home, I couldn't resist checking out the basement. Finding no light switches, I used my phone flashlight. The basement was small and smelled funky, especially near a locked door that emitted a foul odor. Disturbed, I quickly left and went back upstairs. That night, I woke up to find Luke leaning over my bed. I screamed, and he asked if I went into the basement. Terrified, I denied it. He told me to find other living arrangements and left the room. I immediately started packing. Demanding half my rent back, Luke creepily handed me $400, and I left within an hour. After explaining everything to my parents, they welcomed me back, and we mended our relationship. Story 5. In my junior year of college, I moved off campus into a student apartment. My assigned roommate, David, seemed nice at first, but soon his quirks made me uneasy. He would linger in my room, asking personal questions and poking around my belongings. At night, I heard strange noises from his room, talking and shuffling. One night, unable to sleep, I investigated and heard David whispering to himself. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, and he said my name, knowing I was outside his door. My paranoia grew as David's behavior became stranger. He started making odd glances and furtive movements. One night, I woke up to hear him whispering outside my door. When I asked if he was okay, he didn't respond and just walked away. Another night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing and David's footsteps. Confronting him the next day, he claimed he sleepwalked, but I didn't believe him. I decided to search David's room while he was out. Hidden in a drawer, I found photos of me and another guy, taken while we were asleep. Horrified, I took evidence and reported it to the student housing department, who reassigned me to a different apartment. I never spoke to David again, but the memory of those photos and his creepy behavior still haunts me. Story 6. At 23, I moved out of state for work and needed an affordable place to live. After posting for a roommate, a guy named Rob reached out. He seemed normal in his photos and on a FaceTime tour of his house. Though my parents were against it, I moved in. Rob was short and helped me move in. He tried to get to know me, but I didn't get overly friendly vibes at first. Rob offered to show me around town and suggested lunch, then drinks, which I declined. He got quiet, and I felt slightly uncomfortable. A few days into the week, I noticed my hamper seemed moved and a pair of my underwear missing. Disturbed, I bought a lockable doorknob and installed it while Rob wasn't home. That night, Rob banged on my door at 1:30 a.m., angry about the lock. I pretended to be asleep. The next day, I apologized via text, and he insisted the lock come off. I changed it back, but I was scared. Then, a girl knocked on the door, warning me about Rob's history with restraining orders and stalking. I started packing to move out. Rob got suspicious and confronted me, but I stuck to my story about family reasons. That night, I woke up to find him sitting on my bed, caressing my leg. I ran outside and called the police, who helped me get my stuff and ensured Rob gave me my money back. I moved to a studio apartment and vowed never to live with another man unless it was a boyfriend or husband. Story 7. I just finished my studies and needed a small place to live while I looked for a job. I was working part-time at a little grocery store. But now that I was done with school, it was time to find something better. Renting an apartment by myself was too expensive, so I was on the lookout for a room to rent in someone's house. I knew it would be a bit uncomfortable at first living with strangers, but I didn't really have another option. My friend from school who used to share a room with me told me to try Craigslist. It seemed that other websites didn't list single rooms or were too complicated to use. Craigslist had a lot of choices, so I decided to stick with it. After several days, I was getting nowhere. Nobody answered my messages, and the few who did just said the room was already taken. Then, on a Saturday morning, I saw a new listing. It was close, affordable, and looked decent. A man named John was offering a large house with an available bedroom which also had its own bathroom and closet. It seemed perfect. So I sent him an email to show my interest and then went off to my job. Since the ad was fresh that morning, I was hopeful I was the first to reach out. During my lunch break, I checked my emails and saw that John had replied. He wanted me to come and see the place that same afternoon. I knew I'd be tired after work, but I really wanted this room, so I agreed and we set a time. After my shift, I drove there, taking only about 10 minutes. The house looked good from the outside, just a normal house in a regular neighborhood. I parked my car nearby and walked up to the door to knock softly. After waiting a little, I knocked again, a bit louder. Just as I was about to text John, he opened the door to let me in. He was covered in sweat as though he'd just been exercising, and he didn't smell nice at all. I didn't want to seem rude, so I didn't mention it. He started showing me around the first floor, pointing out the kitchen and living room. He said he hardly used these rooms, so I wouldn't be in his way. But looking around, it seemed like he used them a lot. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, and the couch was stained all over. The house was a lot messier than I expected, especially since the photos made it look so clean. One thing that really stood out to me was the couch in the living room. The picture showed a brown leather couch, but the one I saw was black. I guess John might have used old photos of the house from before. This felt a bit dishonest, but I was mainly interested in my room, which was upstairs. John led me to the stairs and then stopped, gesturing for me to go up first. I felt really uneasy as I climbed the stairs, especially since John stayed at the bottom just smiling and telling me my room was the first one on the left. When I reached the top and was about to go to my room, I heard a soft noise from behind the door. I looked back at John and his smile was gone. "Is there someone else living here?" I asked. He sounded annoyed and said it was just a friend staying over and I shouldn't worry. He told me to go look at the room, insisting I would like it. By then I was scared. Why didn't you mention his friend earlier, I thought. It felt like something I should have known. I wanted to leave immediately. I tried to sound confident as I told John the place wasn't right for me and started back down the stairs. He didn't seem happy and blocked the bottom of the stairs. I stopped a few steps away, insisting I had to leave. He tried once more to get me to see the room, but I refused. After a moment, he surprisingly stepped aside with a smile, letting me pass. I rushed out the door. Something was off about that house. I felt fortunate to get out so easily. I'd feared I might need to push my way out. Later, I checked Craigslist and the ad was gone. I often think about what was in that room. Maybe it was empty, but I feel it was something far worse. Story 8. When I was in college, I used to go camping with friends during the summer. One year, we decided to explore a new area we hadn't visited before. It was a dense forest, quite far from the city. We were excited about the adventure and prepared all our gear, including tents, food, and a map of the area. After driving for several hours, we arrived and found a good spot to set up our camp. There were 5 of us: Mike, Sarah, Alex, John, and me. The first day went smoothly. We hiked a few trails, swam in a nearby lake, and enjoyed a campfire at night. However, things started getting strange on the second night. As we were sitting around the campfire, we heard rustling in the bushes. We assumed it was just a small animal and didn't pay much attention. But then, the noises got louder, and it felt like something or someone was watching us. Mike, being the bravest among us, grabbed a flashlight and walked towards the noise. We followed him, feeling a bit nervous. We didn't see anything unusual at first, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Eventually, we shrugged it off and went back to the campfire. Later that night, as we were getting ready to sleep, Sarah screamed. We all rushed to her tent, where she pointed out that her backpack was missing. We searched the entire campsite but couldn't find it. We thought maybe an animal had dragged it away. We tried to sleep, but the feeling of unease kept us awake. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave a day early. We were all a bit spooked and didn't want to stay another night. As we were packing, we found Sarah's backpack hanging from a tree branch about 20 feet off the ground. It was impossible for any of us to have put it there. We quickly packed the rest of our gear and left. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night in the forest. We never went back to that area again. Story 9. When I was a kid, my family moved into an old house in a small town. It was a beautiful, large house with a lot of character, but it was also quite old. My parents were excited about the house, and my siblings and I quickly found our favorite spots. The house had a big backyard, perfect for playing, and a cozy attic filled with all sorts of interesting old things. One evening, about a month after we moved in, I was in my room playing with my toys when I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was walking around up there. I called out to my parents, but they were downstairs and didn't hear me. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out myself. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the creaky stairs to the attic. When I reached the top, I shone the flashlight around but didn't see anything unusual. Just as I was about to go back down, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I turned around quickly and saw a shadow move across the wall. My heart started racing, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the noise continued. It sounded like soft footsteps coming towards me. I gathered all my courage and called out. "Who's there?" There was no answer, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly backed away towards the stairs, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze pass by me, and the flashlight flickered. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could and didn't stop until I reached my parents. I told them what had happened, but they assured me it was probably just the old house settling or the wind. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the attic. After that night, I avoided the attic as much as possible. Whenever I had to go up there, I made sure it was during the day and that someone else was with me. Even now, years later, I still get a little uneasy thinking about that old house and the strange noises in the attic. Story 10. One summer, my friends and I decided to take a road trip across the country. We planned to visit various landmarks and camp out at different spots along the way. We were excited about the adventure and spent weeks preparing for the trip. We packed all the essentials, made a detailed itinerary, and set off early one morning. Our journey was going well, and we had a lot of fun visiting different places. One night we found a secluded camping spot near a forest. It was perfect quiet, beautiful, and far from any busy roads. We set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a relaxing evening under the stars. As it got late, we decided to get some sleep. We were exhausted from the day's activities and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out any words. I thought maybe one of my friends was talking in their sleep, so I tried to go back to sleep. But the whispering continued and seemed to be getting closer. I sat up and looked around the tent, but I couldn't see anything. I unzipped the tent slightly and peered outside. The campfire had died down and everything was dark. Suddenly, I heard the whispering right next to my ear. I jumped and looked around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I quickly woke up my friends and told them what happened. They looked around but didn't find anything unusual. We decided to stay awake for the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch. When morning came, we packed up and left the campsite as quickly as we could. We were all on edge and didn't want to stay another night there. As we drove away, we tried to rationalize what had happened, but none of us could come up with a good explanation. The experience left us shaken, and we made sure to choose more populated campsites for the rest of our trip. Story 11. When I was younger, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned places. We would often go on adventures to find old, deserted buildings and see what we could discover. One day we heard about an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted. Naturally, we decided we had to check it out. We planned to go there on a Saturday night. We gathered our flashlights, cameras, and some snacks and set off around sunset. It was a bit of a drive to get there, but we were all excited. When we finally arrived, the hospital looked even creepier than we had imagined. The building was large and looming, with broken windows and overgrown weeds all around it. We made our way inside through a side door that was slightly ajar. The interior was dark and musty, with peeling paint and scattered debris. We stuck together as we explored, moving slowly and quietly through the hallways. Every now and then, we would hear strange noises, but we tried to brush them off as the wind or animals. After about an hour of exploring, we found a set of stairs leading down to the basement. It was dark and the air felt colder as we descended. When we reached the bottom, we saw a long hallway with several doors on either side. We decided to split up and check the rooms, agreeing to meet back in the hallway in 10 minutes. I took the first room on the left. It was small and empty, with just an old bed frame and some scattered papers. As I was looking around, I heard a soft humming sound. It was faint at first, but it gradually grew louder. I stepped out into the hallway, and the humming stopped. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy. Suddenly, one of the doors at the end of the hallway slammed shut. I jumped and ran towards it, thinking maybe one of my friends was playing a prank. But when I reached the door and opened it, the room was empty. The humming started again, this time louder and more intense. I felt a cold breeze and a sense of dread washed over me. I ran back to the hallway, shouting for my friends. They came rushing out of their rooms, all looking just as scared as I felt. We decided it was time to leave. As we hurried up the stairs and back through the hospital, we kept hearing the humming and strange noises behind us. We didn't stop until we were back outside, breathing heavily and feeling a mix of fear and relief. We never went back to that hospital. The experience left us all shaken, and we decided to stick to exploring less creepy places from then on. To this day, we still talk about that night and wonder what was making those noises in the basement. Story 12. Hi, my name is Maya. I'm 25 years old, living in the city with my boyfriend Kevin. Honestly, things have been tough lately. Kevin lost his job a few months ago, and money has been really tight. We had been staying with my parents for a while to get back on our feet, but you know how it is living with parents as an adult. It just starts to weigh on you after a while. You feel like you've lost your independence. Kevin was going stir crazy just sitting around the house all day. We both were. So when we saw this suspiciously cheap apartment listing on Craigslist, it seemed too good to be true. But Kevin was desperate to get us out of my parents' place. I'll admit, I kind of loved the idea of having our own little nest again, a fresh start. Despite the little voice of doubt in the back of my mind, we took it. I should have listened to that voice. It all started out pretty mundane and normal at first. The apartment was nothing fancy, just a basic one-bedroom in an older building on the rougher side of town. But it was clean. The landlord seemed nice enough, and hey, we could actually afford it. Those first few days, we were just relieved to be out on our own again. We went to the grocery store, cooked dinners together, and binge-watched some shows on Netflix in the evenings. All that simple, blessed normalcy. We had been craving petty disagreements about leaving dishes in the sink, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. I missed those silly arguments when things started to go wrong. It probably began around the 4th or 5th night. I woke up sometime after 11 p.m. to use the bathroom. As I was coming out, I heard the most terrifying sound: a woman screaming. No, screaming doesn't even describe it properly. It was this blood-curdling, ripping shriek of pure fear and agony. It made my blood run cold. I shook Kevin awake in a panic. "Did you hear that? Someone's in trouble. We have to call the police," I said. He tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a TV or something from another apartment. But I knew what I heard. It wasn't normal. Right then, there was frantic knocking at our door, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Kevin motioned for me to stay back as he carefully went over and opened it a crack. It was our landlord, Mr. Kozak. He had this disturbingly casual smile on his face as he said, "No need for alarm, folks. Just a little disagreement between a couple of tenants. but it's being taken care of, so no need to call the authorities, okay? The way he said it with such a total lack of concern was so bizarrely off-putting, almost like he was amused by the whole thing. I shivered despite the warm night. If you're sure, mister, Kozak Kevin said uneasily. We'd still hate to be a bother. We can call if anything else comes up. Oh, there's no bother at all. But please, if you do happen to see or hear anything unsettling, don't go calling the cops, please. That never ends well for anyone, mister. Kozak chuckled as if he just told a hilarious joke. You two seem like such a nice, smart young couple. Why don't you just give me a ring directly if any future unpleasantness arises? I'll get it sorted out. He gave an overconfident wink, then without another word, turned and headed back down the dingy hallway, whistling some eerily cheery tune. The look Kevin and I exchanged in the wake of that supremely unsettling encounter said it all. We both knew deep down that something was deeply wrong here with Mr. Kozak, with his whole place. But what choice did we have? We were broke and hadn't even unpacked all our things yet, so we tried our best to just ignore it. Chalk it up to the landlord being some eccentric old man and hope things didn't get any weirder. Oh, how I wish I could go back to the naive mindset of those first few nights, unburdened by the sickening realizations that were still to come. It started with the small things at first, like hearing strange noises in the night. Not just screams this time, but occasional muffled thumps and the sounds of people frantically running up and down the halls, always at the most unholy hours between midnight and 4 a.m. Whenever I brought it up to Kevin, he got this glazed, half-asleep look in his eyes and denied hearing anything out of the ordinary. Part of me wondered if he was just trying to reassure me, to cling to some sense of normalcy in our new home. Another part of me knew he heard those noises too and was just as terrified as I was. Then more bizarre events started occurring. Strangers would randomly knock at our door at all hours, just dazed-looking men reeking of booze or worse, muttering about Mr. Kozak said it would be okay, or this is where I'm supposed to go. We stuck to the cardinal rule of never opening the door to those sketchy individuals, but the implications of what they were showing up for made my blood run cold. Kevin and I didn't even want to voice our darkest suspicions out loud. Despite the escalating weirdness, we both felt so trapped. Neither of us had jobs at that point, and we had blown what little savings we had on the move and security deposit. Where the hell else could we go? Then came the night that fully shattered any remaining illusions, the night that pushed us past the breaking point. I woke up around 2 a.m. to Kevin tossing and turning, mumbling incoherently in his sleep. I tried to gently shake him awake, growing more frantic as he wouldn't rouse. Finally, his eyes flashed open, wild and unfocused. He looked right through me with zero recognition. Kevin, babe, what's wrong? You were having a nightmare. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a young woman crying, sobbing in pure hopeless despair. It seemed to be coming from the apartment next door. My heart stopped as I realized whatever nightmare had been plaguing Kevin, he likely heard those cries too. We had the same horrific implications about what they meant. I wanted so badly to run out there, pound on that door, and demand to know what kind of depraved stuff Mr. Kozak was up to in this godforsaken place. But I'd seen enough crime documentaries to know that's exactly how young women end up dead and abandoned in lots. So we just sat there, petrified, listening to those tormented wails that went on forever. Eventually, they trailed off into a deathly silence, even more chilling. I knew deep down we couldn't spend another night in this waking nightmare. Not after that. The next morning, we packed up as quickly and quietly as humanly possible. I didn't even care about getting the security deposit back at that point. Nothing was worth sticking around that hellhole a second longer. As we were dragging our meager belongings out to the cab, Mr. Kozak emerged from the shadows and flashed that same sickening grin. Leaving so soon? I do hope every accommodation was to your liking during your stay, he said, letting out this wheezy chuckle that made my skin crawl. Kevin urged me past without a word or eye contact. We never looked back. So there you have it. We got out, but so many mysteries remain. Just what kind of unspeakable depravities were happening behind those paper-thin walls? Who were those poor souls we heard screaming and crying out so desperately? And most of all, what did Kozak mean by accommodation? Was he implying we were somehow complicit by our silence, by witnessing those horrors and doing nothing? I try not to dwell on it, but those questions still haunt me. If only we'd had the resources to go somewhere else right away. If only we'd found the courage to report Kozak, no matter how ominous his warnings. If only. In the end, I suppose we'll never know the full truth. But one thing's for certain from now on, we're never taking too good to be true apartment listings on Craigslist ever again. Some horrors are better left undiscovered. Story 13. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. He took a step closer, then another. That's when he pulled something from behind his back, something long and metal reflecting the moonlight. Oh God, it was a gun. Looking back, I should have screamed, tried to run, called the police, anything. But I just lay there paralyzed as this man from Craigslist walked across the room towards me. I squeezed my eyes shut as he leaned over the bed, waiting for him to pull the trigger or plunge a knife through my chest, but he didn't do either of those things. I opened my eyes to find Steve's face just inches from mine. His rancid breath overwhelmed me as his cracked lips parted in a sick grin. Before I could react, he was on top of me, his huge frame pinning me down effortlessly. He laughed as I squirmed and writhed underneath him, like he enjoyed the struggle or something. Then he did something that will haunt me until my dying day. He leaned in and ran the barrel of the gun across my cheek, then down over my lips, letting it linger there as I whimpered before finally pulling it away and pressing the cold steel against my temple. "You do everything I say, and you'll make it out of this alive," he growled. "Understand?" I managed a frantic nod, tears streaming down my face at this point. He pulled me up by my hair, but shoving me towards the small bathroom. "Get in the shower," he commanded, motioning with the gun, "and don't think about trying anything funny, or I won't hesitate to put a bullet through your head." I felt utterly humiliated as I stripped off my clothes, Steve's eyes raking over every inch of my bare skin. He ordered me to turn on the water, making me stand there shivering and naked under the stream while he watched from the doorway. Eventually, he barked at me to wash myself, and I obeyed, choking back sobs the whole time. Once he was satisfied, he threw a towel at me and told me to dry off. I can't begin to explain the sheer terror that gripped me as I stood there, soaking wet, knowing I was at the complete mercy of this psychopath. Steve ordered me to sit on the edge of the bed, staring intently at me the whole time as if daring me to make a wrong move. The minutes stretched into an eternity as he paced back and forth, muttering to himself under his breath. Finally, he stopped and looked directly at me with those cold, dead eyes. "Now, you're going to do exactly what I say, no questions asked. And maybe, just maybe, I'll let you live." He pointed the gun at my chest again. "Stand up and get dressed. We're going for a little drive." My heart pounded in my chest as I hurriedly pulled on my clothes, praying for some kind of miracle to get me out of this. But deep down I knew that once Steve had me in his car, there would be no escape. The drive through the deserted streets felt like a surreal nightmare. Steve kept one hand on the wheel and the other on his gun, eyes flicking over to me every so often as if to remind me who was in charge. I had no idea where he was taking me, but the destination didn't really matter. All I could focus on was the gun and the unspoken threat it represented. Finally, Steve pulled into a secluded parking lot and cut the engine. "Get out," he ordered, motioning with the gun. My legs felt like jelly as I climbed out of the car, my mind racing with possible escape plans, all of them ending in a bullet to the head. Steve led me towards a dilapidated building, pushing me inside and down a dark, narrow hallway. My heart sank as we reached a door at the end, and he shoved me inside, locking the door behind us. The room was small and windowless, with a single bare bulb casting eerie shadows on the walls. Steve ordered me to sit on the bed, then began pacing again, the gun never leaving his hand. "You're going to stay here until I say otherwise," he snarled. "Don't try to escape. Don't try to escape. Don't try to call for help. I'll be watching, and if you do anything stupid, I will kill you. Understand?" I nodded numbly, too terrified to speak. Steve left the room, locking the door behind him. I was alone, trapped in this nightmare with no way out. Hours passed, though it felt like days. I huddled on the bed, trying to stay calm, but the fear and anxiety were overwhelming. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound made me jump, terrified that Steve would come back and carry out his threats. Finally, the door creaked open, and Steve walked back in. He looked at me with a twisted smile. "You've been a good girl," he said, almost mockingly. "So I'm going to let you go. But remember, if you ever tell anyone about this, I will find you and kill you. Understand?" I nodded frantically, desperate to be free of this nightmare. Steve motioned for me to stand up and follow him. He led me back to the car and drove me to a random street corner, shoving me out of the car without another word. As he drove away, I collapsed on the sidewalk, sobbing uncontrollably, grateful to be alive but forever haunted by the events of that night. Story 14. Hey, I'm Martin, but some folks call me Hope. I'm 34 and a software developer living in Seattle. Recently, I've been going through a tough time. My girlfriend Jen and I broke up 6 months ago after being together for 5 years. It was messy, and I'm still not over it. I decided to move and get a fresh start, which included selling my car because it held too many memories of Jen and me. I found a decent deal on Craigslist for a 2015 Honda Civic. I had no idea that buying this car would turn my life into a nightmare. When I met the seller to check out the car, everything seemed normal. The seller, Bill, was a middle-aged guy who was very friendly. He said he was upgrading to a newer model. The car looked good, no major dents or scratches. I took it for a test drive and everything seemed fine. We finalized the paperwork for $8,500 and I drove my new Civic back to my apartment. A few days later, I decided to clean the interior. That's when I made a disturbing discovery. Underneath the backseat cushions, I found a hidden compartment. It was a small door carved into the trunk area, leading to a tiny enclosed space between the rear seats and the trunk. I couldn't understand why a regular car would have something like this unless it was for a sinister purpose. When I looked inside the cramped compartment, I felt sick. It smelled of stale sweat and something more sinister. Shining my phone's light inside, I saw streaks of dried brown liquid that looked like blood. Feeling nauseous, I quickly closed the compartment and stepped back, overwhelmed with dread. What terrible things had the previous owner, Bill, done with this vehicle? Had he used the secret room to transport victims he had harmed or killed? The questions swirled in my mind, each more horrifying than the last. I realized I was now connected to something deeply disturbing and possibly criminal. Part of me wanted to go straight to the authorities to report my finding and put as much distance as possible between me and whatever depravity this vehicle had witnessed. But another part of me, influenced by crime shows and horror movies, worried that coming forward might make me a person of interest, even a suspect. So I did nothing for the time being. I tried my best to go about my daily life and not think about the ominous secret compartment. But how could I not? Every time I opened the trunk or slid into the driver's seat, I was assaulted by phantom smells and visions of unimaginable horrors. The subtle stain of dread resurfaced, leaving me uneasy and tormented by morbid hypotheticals. Restless nights were punctuated by vivid nightmares, visions of being trapped in that cramped, sweaty compartment, banging hopelessly on the door, gulping stale air as my cries for help went unanswered. Other times I dreamt I was Bill, a mild-mannered monster calmly shuttling my unspeakable cargo to its grim destination. Awake, I began noticing small details about the vehicle that had previously escaped me. A splotch of reddish-brown discoloration in the trunk lining, strange symbols etched into the underside of the dashboard, and the faint, acrid scent of chemicals lingering in the cabin's recirculated air. Each observation fed the cycle of dread and fueled my imagination to even darker places. After a week of inner torment, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I would remove the wretched compartment, scrub the vehicle clean of any lingering remnants of its prior purpose, and be done with it once and for all. Armed with a toolkit and a bucket of industrial cleaner, I set about dismantling the hidden room. As I carefully pried away its flimsy wooden panels, I knew my plan was doomed to fail. Tucked amid the sickly beige upholstery was a small cardboard box. Its contents promised to further unravel what remained of my sanity. Inside, I found handwritten notes scrawled in what seemed to be chicken scratch. Pages and pages of rambling, half-coherent screeds vacillated between records of apparent daily minutiae and grandiose proclamations about bearing witness to an ethical truth. Certain chilling phrases leapt off the page there everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Horrible, unblinking eyes peering through the veil at all times. Can't let them steal my essence, not after coming this far. Another page, decorated with strange symbols reminiscent of those on the dashboard, read the time of transformation draws near. The offering prepares the vessel to shrug off its withered husk and be remade anew, incorruptible and eternal. As I read on, slack-jawed in disbelief, it became clear these were no ordinary, unhinged ramblings. Something larger and far more insidious bound them together. As I sit here clutching those cryptic pages, part of me wants nothing more than to shove them back into the shadows and return to blissful ignorance. To move on from this existential detour and find some semblance of normalcy again, pushing bile-inducing questions of cosmic dread from my mind. But another part call it sickening curiosity or a deficit of self-preservation feels inextricably drawn to unraveling this disturbing saga, even if the truth is too horrific to behold. For now, the mysterious compartment sits reopened in the car, almost daring me to keep pulling at its sickening threads. While part of me craves a return to blissful ignorance, another part can't resist the lure of the unknown.